everybody, Dave Thomas here again, and today I am building the LOC Precision Striker X, which is part of their LOC1 series. These are downscaled versions of LOC Precision's high power model rockets. So let's go ahead and open this up. Now, one of the particular negative aspects of these kits has nothing to do with its structure, but that they don't come with written instructions. Instead, they give you a QR code that you can scan, and this will take you to their website, and from there you can download these instructions, which are very generic. They use the same instructions for all of their LOC1 kits. So these can be a little bit confusing at times. Let's make sure we've got everything here. So we have a pre-slotted main body tube, motor mount body tube, nose cone that's in two sections. This is a payload section, and in my kit the coupler for it is inside of it there. Okay, so if you're missing a coupler, that's where it is. Alright, we've got a small parts package here that includes the fins, bulkheads for the payload section, our launch lug, engine clip, engine rings, and thrust ring. So everything should be in there. Also this little screw eye, which will go into this bulkhead. And we've got another small parts package here. This has the shock cord, the streamer, and the streamer protector. Alright, we've got lots of advertisements for R.E.A.R and EEE and LOC, and then finally we have a set of self-stick decals here. So it looks like everything we need is in the package, and so I'm going to clear this away and we will get started on the motor mount. For our motor mount, we're going to need the motor mount tube here, and then some of the parts from this small parts bag. And I've also got the main body tube out here. That's not necessary immediately, but I'm going to show you something using it that will give us a guide for where our centering rings need to be. Alright, so I'm going to set aside the fins for now. Alright, we need the three rings. That bulkhead we can set aside, as well as the launch lug. And then we need the clips here. Alright, so on the motor mount, our first step in the instructions is to make a mark 1/4 inch from the forward end of our motor mount tube. And I always like to write aft on one end here so that I don't get the two confused and put something in backwards. Alright, and then on that mark we're going to cut about an 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter wide slot using a hobby knife here. You can kind of wiggle it around there to open it up. And then our motor clip here, one end of it just has a single right angle bend in it, and that is going to go in the slot we just made. Okay, so it should pop right in there. Okay, now the centering rings here, the instructions don't actually give us a measurement for how far down they need to go. So I'm going to take the first one and I'm going to push it all the way down. And I'm doing it from the front end because a lot of times it's harder to get it on from the aft end because of the clip there. Alright, but that's going to go pretty much close to, if not at the end of the motor mount tube. The forward one I generally just put right there so it covers the clip up to the slot there. Now the reason I wanted the main body tube here was to put this against it. So when this is fully assembled, the motor mount will be flush with the body tube. And that means you can't have any of this centering ring showing in the slot. Alright, so let's see if I can do this without losing all the rings. So if I put this in, like it is now, you can see there's the centering ring in the slot, and that's going to interfere with the fins. So I need to bring this down. Okay, I'm going to leave, I think we've got enough room to leave just a little bit of the tube there. I'll put that back in. Okay, and there we don't have any problems with it. Alright, so for this particular rocket, that's where those two rings need to be. And now we can glue them in place. Alright, so to glue these, I'm going to pull the aft ring all the way down flush with the aft end of the motor mount tube. And now I'm just going to run a bead of glue around here. It doesn't have to be really heavy, but you do want it to be contiguous. Okay, so just like that, and now I'm just going to pull my ring back up into that glue, back to the point where I had it before. And in fact, I can go ahead and measure again if I need to. And yes, indeed, that one's going to work just fine. Okay, and then for the forward ring, I'm going to pull it down a little bit here and do the same thing. Alright, if you end up with too much glue in a spot, then you can just take a finger here and smooth that around. Alright. And then if you get any up here on the top surface, just go ahead and wipe that out. Okay, and now I'm just going to pull this back up to where it just covers the forward end of the clip. And again, if you need to, you can smooth that glue around just like that. Okay, now we need to put the thrust ring in, and that's going to go right here and lay on top of the end of the clip. Now in this case, I'm just going to use my finger here with a little bit of glue on it. We want glue to go all the way around the inside edge there, but not down very far, because we don't want glue to drip down past where that ring is supposed to be. So we don't want a whole bunch of glue down beyond that. Okay, so here I'm just going to take my thrust ring now, put it through the glue, and it's going to rest right on top of the engine clip. Now on the opposite side, this may try to push down further, and you don't want that. You want to keep that even all the way around. Okay, so now I'm going to let this dry for at least 10 minutes here, and we'll come back to it to mount the shock cord. Now while I'm waiting for the glue to dry on the motor mount, I'm going to go ahead here just a little bit, and about halfway through the instructions it shows gluing the launch lug on, and they really don't tell you exactly where. Okay, they just show it in between two of the fins and a little ways up here. So for a rocket this size, my general rule of thumb is to put the launch lug between 5 and 8 centimeters from the aft end, okay, or about 2 to 3 inches. And so I would prefer to have a good guide instead of just trying to eyeball it later on. So I'm going to first start by just marking approximately halfway between two of the fin slots. And then use a straight edge here. Now this is a fin marking guide made by Estes. If you don't have one of these, just use a door frame or a window frame. You just need something to let you draw a straight edge on a tube. And I'm going to run that about halfway up the tube here. Okay, so now I've got a nice straight line that I can sight along. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and measure here. This is a little bit longer rocket because it has a payload section on it, so I'm going to go up to about 70 centimeters here and mark right there. Okay, and then I'm going to use my launch lug itself as a guide. So if I place that along the line, and I can make another mark right here. So that's where my launch lug will end up going when we get to that point. But having this already in place will make it a lot easier to make sure that it's on straight. Now something else I'm going to do here is just take a little bit of fine sandpaper, and between those two marks I'm just going to give it a couple of strokes here. It'll partially erase that line, and that's okay. What this is doing is roughening up the shiny surface of the body tube so that the glue will stick better between the launch lug and the tube. And if you want, you can also sand the back side of the launch lug, although that's less critical. Okay. While we continue to wait for the glue to dry on the motor mount, we can take a look at our fins here. These are made of very thin plywood, and so you don't have to worry about the usual direction of the grain and such that you do with balsa fins. Now, these are fairly detailed and fragile though, so we've got to be careful, especially with this extension that goes up beyond the leading edge here. If you want, you can streamline these, or at least round them. Although as thin as they are, you can also just leave them flat and they're still going to fly pretty well. Alright, I'm going to start out by simply taking some 150 grit sandpaper here, and I'm going to remove the soot from the laser cutter that produced the fins. Alright, you don't have to get all the way down to bright bare wood. Just get that loose stuff off. Okay, and especially on the root edges here, that soot will help, or will prevent the glue from binding well. And so if you get that off, or at least mostly off there, that's going to give us better adhesion between the fin and the body tube. Okay, so if you want, you can just leave it like that. Or if you want to have a more streamlined fin, you can either round or taper the leading and trailing edges here. And as I said, this is so thin that unless you're in a competition with someone else with the same rocket, it's not going to be that big a deal if you don't streamline it. Okay, so I'm going to treat the other two fins in the same way, and then we'll come back. I have my fins sanded, and I'm going to set those aside for now. And the next thing we need to do is connect the shock cord to the motor mount. So we're going to take the package here that has the streamer and everything in it, carefully open that up. Okay. So this is a Kevlar shock cord, and unlike the rubber ones that you often see in, say, Estes kits and similar kits, this really doesn't stretch. So if you pull it, it just stops, which means you need a really long shock cord because the rocket is depending upon the distance between the two halves now to slow down enough that we don't actually rip something out. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just cut off this frayed part. Okay, the other end, it's not too bad. I'm actually going to use it. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is somewhere along the forward centering ring, it doesn't matter where really, I'm just going to cut a little notch here. Don't go all the way through the ring. Just need enough of a notch that the shock cord can go through it. Okay, so now I'm just going to take the shock cord on one end here. I'm going to tie a double knot in it, or 2 half hitches if you're a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. Okay, like that. Cinch that down as tight as you can get it. Okay, now most of the shock cord here now I'm going to send forward, and then I'm going to scrunch the rest of it right up against that centering ring. Okay, and I've got a little bit of a free end here. Now, one of the problems with Kevlar is it doesn't hold knots well, because it's actually kind of slippery. And so I don't want to just rely upon that knot staying there. And I'm going to run a bead of glue over the shock cord. Alright, and then take my finger and smooth that in, embedding the shock cord into the glue against that forward centering ring there. Okay, and just make sure everything's down. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and let this dry again for a while before we mount it inside the body tube. Now, while we're waiting for glue to dry again, we can go ahead and assemble the nose cone and the payload section. So for the nose cone, you're going to need some plastic model cement or some super glue. Either one will work. The model cement will probably work better. And here I'm just going to run a bead of glue right inside the edge. And you want a nice consistent bead, but it doesn't have to be really thick. In fact, if you get it too thick, it will melt the plastic and deform the nose cone. And then just take the base of the nose cone, slide that in, give it a twist back and forth a few times to seat the glue well, and that can be set aside to dry as well. Now, for our payload bay, first of all we're going to need to find the center of this coupler. Alright, and so it's just under 5 centimeters there, which means it's probably just 2 inches. Go over here to the not rest of the world scale. Okay, so I'm just going to make a mark here at 1 inch. Alright, and this bulkhead here is going to insert in like that. But before we do that, we need to attach this little screw eye. Alright, so that's going to screw into the hole there. And what I'm going to do first is just add a little dot of glue there so that the threads will become coated with glue as they go through. Alright, I'm just going to push that all the way in. So I've got this going in until there's about 1 to 1.5 layers of threads that are still visible there. You don't want to go all the way up to the smooth part or you'll lose the hold. Okay, and then back here where it's sticking through, I'm just going to cover that in a blob of glue. Alright, and it doesn't have to be pretty, I just want to cover that up. And truth be told, for most things you're not going to notice it anyway. But just in case you do have to put something that's in your payload section that does not react well to little pointy parts, this way the pointy part's covered up. Alright, now to mount that part, take the coupler and we're going to make a bead of glue here right inside. It's a little heavy than what I want, so I'm just going to smooth that around a bit. Alright, and having heavy glue there is not a big deal, it just takes longer to dry. Okay, and now I'm going to put this in, and note, since I've got so much glue there, I'm going to actually take advantage of that. So I'm going to insert this kind of almost at a 90-degree angle, push that past the glue, and then I'm going to bring it back. And then I can take that excess glue, smooth that around, alright, and then adjust this as needed. Okay, I prefer to have it just inside the coupler there. about like that. And I'm going to set this aside to dry as well. Coming back to the motor mount, that glue is still wet, but it's got a skin on it, which is all I really need to make sure the Kevlar doesn't move. And I'm going to take the rest of this and I'm going to wind it around my fingers. This has got a really nice long shot cord to it. Alright, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to stuff it down inside the motor mount. Okay, and I'll make sure then that everything is in and that we're going through that notch. Okay. Now this is going to go into the body tube, and I'm going to make 2 rings of glue here. So I'm going to use an applicator, just a long Q-tip basically. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a ring of glue just beyond my fin slots there. Okay, so I'm just going to take my applicator here, go past the fin slots. I'm just going to run that around the inside. Okay, so now if I look down inside of it, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but there's a ring of glue. There, you can kind of see it there. Alright, so a ring of glue just beyond the slots. And that is what the forward ring on my motor mount is going to slide into. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and slide this in, and I prefer to have the engine clip on the same side as my launch lug, so I'm going to line this up in such a way, like that. Okay, now, I'm not into the glue quite yet. In fact, I'm going to back that off just to make sure. And now I'm going to take a little more glue, and I'm going to put a ring just inside the aft end of the body tube. And you can move the motor mount back and forth and around as needed, so you can get that glue applied in there. And it's no big deal if you're getting stuff all over the motor mount there. You know, try to minimize it just for weight, but it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so now making sure I'm lined up again. Now I'm going to push this in, and I can feel it grab in the forward ring. Alright, and I'm going to take a ruler here and push that so that the 2 tubes are now flush. Okay, and that aft ring now is in the aft ring of glue. The forward ring has gone through the ring of glue. And I'm going to let this dry for just a few minutes, just enough to keep it from moving, and then we're going to put the fins on. Okay, so the motor mount is glued in place enough that it's not going to move easily. And the first thing I'm going to do here is dry fit my fins to make sure that we don't have any problems that way. So we're just going to pop one of each into the body tube slots. Okay, and you may notice here there's a little bit of play, and that's fine. When we actually mount these, we're going to pull these all the way back so that the trailing edge of the fin is close to flush with the aft end of the rocket here. So all of those are fitting fine. If they don't, for example, if they're sticking up too far and you've got a gap under that leading edge, then you can just take and sand a little bit of the fin tab there until it comes down. Likewise, if it's just not going in the slot, just sand a little bit on each side of the fin tab, and that should fix that problem. Alright, to mount the fins, we're going to take a thin film of glue here, and this is a case where more is not better. Okay, we don't want this to be really heavy, or it'll just take all the longer to dry. Okay, but just enough to glue this in place. So now I'm just going to pop that in Okay, and as I said, I'm going to move it all the way back. Alright, and then press down on the forward end there so that leading point is making contact. Okay, and then just make sure that the fin is straight out from the rocket body. Alright, now I've got a little bit of excess glue here. I'm just going to smooth that in a bit, forming kind of a pre-fillet. Okay, I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes, but because of the slots, you can actually add the fins fairly quickly. I would just give it 4 or 5 minutes between each one, just so you don't bump one off while you're trying to get the next one on. I'm going to go off camera for the other 2 fins, and then we'll come back for the launch lug. Here I have my fins in place, and now I'm going to attach the launch lug here. So I'm just going to move that out of the way for just a moment. Okay, and on the launch lug, we're just going to run a bead of glue here. And just like the fins, this does not need to be really thick. It's best to have a thin one that's going to adhere quickly and strongly, and then reinforce that with fillets later on. Okay, so here I'm going to just put that on my line that I made earlier. And you can use the line now to make sure that the launch lug is in line, not only with the line itself, but with the entire rocket. Okay, so you can kind of sight this like a gun sight down the length of the rocket, and that one looks pretty good there. And so, because the launch lug is so light, you can usually just let these stand upright like this. And I'm going to set this aside to dry for a while, and we're going to come back to the payload section. The glue on my bulkhead here is not completely dry, but it's set enough that we can handle it. And so now we're going to insert this into the aft end of the payload section, and whichever end you choose, that's the aft end. So I'm just going to run a bead of glue right along the inside of this, and this can be relatively heavy because it's going to go over a fairly large area here as we insert this in. So I'm going to find my mark. That's going to be my end point, and now I'm just going to kind of twist this back and forth so it seats itself in the glue right until we get to there. Okay, and that's as far as it needs to go. You can let that dry. Now when this is all finished, the nose cone is going to fit here in the forward end of the body tube. Now you can see that's really loose there. We'll put some masking tape on the shoulder to snug that up, and then this part will fit into the body tube. Now I'm not going to do it now as that glue's not dried yet. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside to dry some more, and when we come back we'll attach the shock cord to the payload bay and install the streamer and the streamer protector. Now that the fins are dry, we can put fillets on both the fins and the launch lug. And so for this, I'm just going to run a bead of glue down here. And I prefer to do facing sides at the same time. Okay, and then I'm just going to smooth this in using my finger. And it's a good idea to have a rag or paper towel or something on hand to clean up the excess. Okay, and then as long as you keep the rocket horizontal and you're using fairly thick glue, you can just move on to the next one. And then you're going to quickly want to remove any excess that gets up on the fins themselves, or just any place that you don't want it. Okay, now you can see where it's kind of filled in those trailing notches in there, And if it's really important to you to keep those, then just take a little bit of tissue or an edge of a rag and just kind of work it in there and clean out that glue. Just like that. Okay, and the glue is going to shrink a little bit as well. Okay, and then we also need to do the same down here on the launch lug. Okay, and again, just smooth away any excess. Alright, and now I'm going to let that whole thing dry for at least 30 minutes before we come back. Now that my fin fillets are finished, as is the fillet for my launch lug there, basically what we need to do now is simply tie the whole rocket together. So I'm going to pull the shock cord out of my motor mount here. Okay, and so just run it all completely out, and then you're going to put the end back up through the motor mount. And this may be the easiest thing to do is to just take a dowel and put a piece of masking tape around that temporarily, and then just use that to feed this back up through the rocket. The main thing is that if you try and do it without the dowel there, is it tends to hang up on the end of the engine clip and the thrust ring there. Okay, so however you do it, we just need to make the shock cord go all the way back through the rocket and out the forward end. So once you are ready to put the rocket together, either before or after painting, then we're going to need our streamer here and the streamer protector. This is made out of Nomex, a fire-resistant cloth, and this is, you use this in place of wadding. And so here we're just going to poke the shock cord through the little slot there, pull that all the way down, and then do the same thing with the streamer. Now the streamer color will vary just depending on what lot the rocket came out of. Okay, so we're going to pull it all the way down as well, like that. And then the very end here, we're going to tie onto the screw eye. Just put a double knot in that. And try and keep the free end length to a minimum. If you need to, you can shorten it later on. Alright, so cinch that down good. And then just put a little drop of super glue onto the knot, and this will help keep it from coming frayed and undone. And if you want, you can also put some super glue up here to keep that end from fraying. Alright, and then I'm going to wipe off the excess there. It doesn't need a whole lot. Alright, and then the last thing, if this is anywhere where it might get up underneath the body tube against the shoulder like that, go ahead and trim that back. So I've got just a little bit too much there. And you can see why Kevlar is used in body armor, because it doesn't cut very well. Okay, so we've got that. Once everything's attached, then just take the streamer and fold it lengthwise over itself a few times here. And this is how it usually arrives. I'm just folding it now against some of the creases. And then once you get to this point, you can roll that up. Alright, and then you just cover it here with that Nomex protector, and this kind of makes a piston out of it, and you're just going to poke that down inside. Alright, and then just take the rest of the Kevlar line here and wrap it up and put that down inside too. Okay, and just make sure that you don't get any of the shock cord in between the shoulder and the body tube there. Alright, now that part should be snug, but loose enough that it'll come apart with the ejection charge. The way it is now is fine. Alright, and then you can add the nose cone, and this needs to be really snug because it's not supposed to come out at all. And so if you need to here, you can add some masking tape to it. And sometimes you don't even need necessarily a full circumference. Sometimes just half a circumference will work. Although this one feels really loose, so I'm going to go ahead and start with a full circumference here. Alright, and pop that in. There we go. And that's really snug. And again, we want that because we don't want the nose cone to come off during flight or recovery. But since it's not attached to the recovery system, this is the part that's going to come apart. Okay, so this needs to be snug but not really tight. This should be really tight. Alright, so structurally this rocket is done. I will paint it and show at least one way to put the decals on, but I'm not going to go into all the details there. So I'm going to take this off camera, prime it, paint it, and when we come back we'll do the decals. Here I have my rocket painted, and the last thing to do is to apply the decals. So I'm going to come back to our illustration here. Alright, and so the sheet just comes as one whole printed decal. You need to cut these out. And you'll need to make some decisions as to how you want these to go. So, for example, if you want to use the illustration shown here, these three triangular stripes will need to be cut out individually. You'll also then need to cut out the two Striker X's here. Those will go on either side. And then the riveted here part looks to go as a wrap here. Okay, and we've got these little bullseyes. Those are being used as a wrap down at the bottom part. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple of these, and then I'll go off camera and do the rest of them. So let's go ahead and start with the two wraps, because I'm going to do those first. I haven't decided what I want to do with the other ones quite yet, but I know I want to use the wraps here. Okay, so I'm going to cut that right at the edge. Okay, we'll put the Striker X aside. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure this is going to fit first of all. So I'm just going to, without removing the backing, make sure this is going to go all the way around, and it will. So here we just need to peel it off. Alright, and first of all I'm going to do this lightly. I've got a little bit of an edge there, so I'm going to use it. Okay, now if you want, you can get this right at the edge of the body tube. I'm going to do it just below so I don't have to worry about it fraying off later on. And the nice thing about the vinyl here is you can stretch it a little bit to help you get in the right position. Alright, and then that should overlap there. Okay, if it's not quite straight enough for you, you can just peel it back and put it back on. I'm going to do the same thing here with our little gun sights. Not sure exactly what those are supposed to be. You know, they're not quite the correct symbol for center of pressure. I think they're just supposed to look cool, and they do. Okay, now this one I'm going to put, well, see, this shows it kind of right above the fins here, but my launch lug is in the way. So the best I can do there is bring it up. I could also, if I wanted to, put it either here at the edge of the main body tube, or here at the bottom of the payload bay. I think I'm going to go with the former one there. So again, there's no reason why you need to use the same layout that the packaging shows. You can be creative with it. Okay, so here I'm going to do the same type of thing. I don't really need to particularly line these up with any part of the rocket. I'm going to try and get this right on the edge there. Okay, and I'm going to continue with the rest of the decals off camera, and I'll come back when they're finished. So here's my finished model. As you can tell, I didn't go by the package recommended decor here. I actually used those triangular stripes as a wrap, and it makes it kind of look unusual there. I also put the two Striker X labels on the same side, and actually the forward one is on the payload bay, so I can move that to wherever I want it to, but for now they're going to line up. Hope you had fun building this. Have a successful launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.